Hello everyone, and welcome to our program today. This is the first public discussion Resilient Talks in 2023. My name is Slavitescu Eusebiu, and today we're going to talk about the contest over the Black Sea, challenges to the resilience of bordering states. The security challenges posed by many actors in our immediate vicinity in 2022 to the Euro-Atlantic posture and resilience triggered a reshaping of the entire security architecture in the Black Sea region and the whole of Europe. How does the expert community perceive the changes to the regional security? What are the lessons learned for the international and regional actors? What could be done to restore, maintain, and enhance resilience in the Black Sea region? We'll discuss these topics with Dr. Thomas-Durell, currently an academic advisor to the President of the Defense Security Cooperation University, Washington, D.C. Professor Young is a European Program Manager, Center for Civil Military Relations at the Naval Postgraduate School, Monterey, California. He has a background spanning 20 years of experience in designing, delivering, and assessing institutional capacity building projects in Central and Eastern Europe. Also, we are joined today by General Stefan Danila, former Chief of General Staff of the Romanian Armed Force, and Niculae Iancu, President of the Integrated Intelligence, Defense and Security Solutions Association. Thank you for accepting our invitation today. The ongoing conflict in our neighborhood not only reshaped the security situation in the wider Black Sea region, but also dramatically changed the world powers' perception of the region, its importance for global security, and the roles of key regional players. Previously, the Black Sea was rarely considered among the world's most important strategic spaces. Key member states of the European Union and NATO have shown limited interest in Black Sea security, lacked a coherent strategy on the region, and even had no certainty whether the Black Sea region is an integral part of Europe. Yet, the current challenges have shifted the Black Sea region from the periphery to the center of the Euro-Atlantic security process. The war also indicated that the Black Sea region should be considered not separately, but as part of all of European security system. The return of large-scale war to Europe forced many countries to soberly re-evaluate their security, resilience, and become better aware of their vulnerability. The future geopolitical landscape will be shaped by a vision of Russia as a threat that should be contained. Also, relevant to our discussion today, the introduction of the bill on the Black Sea security in the US Senate on July 12th last year, Black Sea Security Act of 2022. The bill calls on the administration in Washington for a more robust, resilient US policy towards the Black Sea region, including increased support for the region from the US, NATO, and the EU, ensuring a permanent and sustainable presence on the eastern flank, and developing economic relations between the US and the Black Sea region, namely Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia, the Republic of Moldova, Ukraine, and Turkey. Now we're going to start with the questions and with a more dynamic approach to our topics that I introduced earlier. In Madrid last year, allies underlined the Black Sea as one of the critical areas of strategic relevance to NATO allies. To some extent, the Black Sea is reflecting a broader competition between revisionist and aggressive Russia and our democratic world. What does this mean for Romania? Is it an opportunity or more like a disadvantage? Professor.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back in Bucharest. I just need to apologize for my appearance. I'm missing some baggage, compliments of Lufthansa, otherwise I'd be dressed like my dear friends and colleagues here, so I apologize, no disrespect. Let me also say that I have to start off with a disclaimer that everything I say is my own personal opinion. It does not reflect the policy, positions, or views of my university or the Department of Defense or the U.S. government. So I'm being a full professor. Your question being with this Madrid Declaration and the new strategic concept, is it an opportunity or is it
more of a disadvantage?
a disadvantage? Well, I think it's more of an opportunity because let's look at it in its proper context. The Wales Summit did a lot of very good things for the alliance. What, 2015? If my memories, or was it 16? Around. Apologies for that. But that was disadvantaged to the Black Sea because all the focus was on the Baltic states for a variety of political reasons. I've always felt that the greatest vulnerability to the alliance is not in the Baltic states because in some ways there are many more threats and challenges to Russian aggression there than anywhere else. But I always felt that the problem would be in Bessarabia, in Moldova, with the Transnistria, simply because it is perfectly placed for Russians to make mischief, and they've made mischief there for 30 years. And what a better way of making trouble for very low cost trouble for NATO nations, Romania, and a partner, Moldova, the Republic of Moldova, than playing games there. So I think Wales was nice because it was a wake-up call, but remember, Wales talked about putting Allied reinforced forces, enhanced forces they called them, in the Baltic states and in Poland, which was great, but the response to the Black Sea was more training. And I critiqued it at the time, and I continue to critique it. Thank God with Madrid, we now recognize that the Black Sea is front and center, very, very important. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to respond appropriately. Now the question is, will the forces follow? And more importantly, in my view, where's the money? You don't have the money, you don't really have the sustainability, you really don't have the credibility. So I think for the moment, things look very good. For Romania, for Bulgaria, Slovakia, Hungary, simply by dint of the fact that we have the war, ongoing war on NATO borders in Ukraine. But I want to see the follow-through with perhaps more NATO infrastructure funding, because God knows infrastructure of this part of the world needs a lot of investment. Same in Poland, there's no question about that, but I think it's probably the greater need is here, simply because you haven't gotten the attention you've had. The same Poland, and of course the Polish economy has done much, much better than Romania, and the infrastructure there, it's still, there are some problems, but it's also, what has been rebuilt is world class, and here it's just been slower, and we no longer have time. Time is done. We need it now.
So when you refer to money, to funding, you talk about infrastructure, so all of these ways to enhance our security on this flank, on the eastern flank.
Correct. Something as simple as roads, railway heads, railways, you name it, bridges. One of the problems we found in Poland was for us to reinforce Poland, we had a slight problem. Our Abrams M1A1s are too wide for the tunnels, the railway tunnels in Poland. So we had to gift to the Polish armed forces a fleet of heavy equipment transport trucks, simply to be able to move the tanks, because they're too wide for the tunnels. It's not the problem. The Leopards don't have the same problem. They're not as wide.
This is one of the things that is happening with the Three Seas initiative, with all these regional formats that are trying to really enhance.
Which is your own money, by the way. European money.
Not just our money, but
European money.
Yeah.
Which is, it's great. I mean, if you want to show, the capital markets that you're serious, is if you do something like this. We're putting our own money into this to develop infrastructure. Capital markets will respond with a lot more interest than if you're only trying to do it yourself or if you're waiting for gifts.
I see. But did we really need a war to realize that this region is critical?
Yes, we did.
Unfortunately.
Welcome to democracy.
To be fair, up to 2014, the Black Sea region, but the Black Sea was a small lake or small sea for not only for the United States. It was very difficult for Romania to to make understanding the importance of Black Sea in Europe, in our organization, we are part of European Union. When we started to rebuild the maritime strategy, it was very difficult to put in this strategy in the Black Sea. Now, after 2014, it was another kind of interest about the Black Sea region, and after last year, right now, we know that United States is interested in the Black Sea region. This is very important for us, because even that the control of the straits are under Turkey rule, we don't have enough, feeling of security here in Romania or in the other countries that are close to the border, the Black Sea, after the invasion of the Russia in Ukraine. Up to 2014, we had here in Black Sea an operation that means the friendship of the countries that are around the Black Sea, the Black Sea Harmony operation. Now it's closed, this operation. And to be fair, it is important for us to know that a country like United States has an interest in the Black Sea region.
I totally agree that the NATO 2022 strategy concept opens a window of opportunity for NATO member states located in the Black Sea region. And when I'm referring to the Black Sea region, I'm referring to the countries, literal countries to the sea. So, but as the wider Black Sea region is still a contested approach. So I think that for us, for Romania, this is a very good opportunity to reaffirm our position in NATO and to make the Black Sea more relevant as a security complex, as Barry Buzan defined this concept in the aftermath of the Cold War. And it is still important to focus on the need of locating more and more military resources in this region to defend the entire alliance, to deter and defend, just to mention the first core task NATO assumed through its new strategic concept, but also for future developments. This is also important. Professor Iancu already mentioned the impact on critical infrastructure development. I think that it is important not only for the NATO member states here in the region, but also for our partners, because we have to link with our partners to connect with them, including using the critical infrastructure we have to build, and to make them more, let's say, comfortable with our support we provide through existing partnership programs in this region.
Just to add on top of that, Romania was one of the promoters of this idea to put the critical importance of the Black Sea in the new NATO concept. We have shouted over and over again for some years now, and well, it happened, and we were really glad for it. Heading to the second question, since February last year, we have seen an increase in Allied presence in the eastern flank, specifically in Romania. To your feeling, how safe are we in Romania today? How safe is Romania? Is Romania ready to face unprecedented challenges in its immediate vicinity if it would go that way? How resilient is Romania and broadly the entire eastern flank today?
Well, I think the resilience question I'll leave to my Romanian experts. I have my own views, but I think I'll let them speak about that. But let me just say, one of the key outcomes, I think, from this horrible war of Russian aggression against imperfect but still the democratic Ukraine is how bad the Russian military is, how unprepared it was, how singularly untrained it is and remains, how non-existent the logistics structures remain, how uncoordinated, unorganized, not disorganized, just unorganized command structure. So I think if anything, we have kind of a dilemma, because I think the Russian elements of power are much more limited than we may have assumed. They still have a lot of money. They can still make a lot of mischief, but energy hydrocarbons, I think, is the best example of that. They can play a huge spoiler role with their money, which just seems mysteriously to find its way into Western political campaigns, just like our friends in Australia and New Zealand are seeing with Chinese money. So, my boss, President Dr. Celeste Gaventer at my university, wrote a piece a few years back in Foreign Affairs with some colleagues, eminent colleagues, looking at how the Russians and the Chinese have taken our own Western institutions and have weaponized them against our democracy. Lobbying organizations, you name it, money, putting money into political campaigns, making all sorts of mischief for us. So, those elements are still there. And in some ways, I think we need to be aware that they're still there and they still work, unlike the Russian military. And they will work for some time, because the Russians do, and the Chinese, let's add them into this, they have plenty of money, plenty of dollars they can use in this. And I think also in Russia, it's just not the government, but it's this ecosystem of corruption and oligarchs, where oligarchs are positioning themselves for greater influence in Moscow. And one of the ways you do that is by showing Putin what it is you're doing to further his interests. So they may not necessarily be government sponsored. I think the Wagner Group with Poroshin is maybe one example of this, but I think there's a lot more. There are other individuals who are doing very nasty things against us, against our institutions, more effectively. And the reason why they're more effective is because we don't see them as easily. They're subtle, but they're there. And I think, historically speaking, Russia has never been more dangerous than when it's weak. And now it's weak, and it's getting weaker by the day. And so I think we have to be very, very on the lookout, to be prepared, and thank God we have this center here looking at resilience, because we need to be prepared for something we don't see coming. Because the Russians are very good at this. They're not necessarily very good with follow-through, but they're very good at weaponizing things that we've never thought of that they would do before. They can't do it a second time, because we're aware of it. But they'll do it the first time. And heaven only knows what it is. Is it cyber? I can't even begin to list what instruments of mischievous nature they could do. But they're going to do it. And I have a very controversial view, and this is my own personal view, and again, it's not the view of the federal government, the Department of Defense, but I've always seen this in my own understanding of Russian history and contemporary security issues in Europe. This is partially a war of extermination against the Ukrainian nation, not the state necessarily. When you talk about exterminating a people, this is genocidal talk, but I see this very much as a proxy war vis-a-vis NATO. And thank heavens NATO has responded in a unified way, in a coherent way. I'm not too stressed about the last week debates over who's going to send tanks first and the rest. They're going to get sent. It's going to happen. It's just a question of time. Now the issue is, how do we support it? That's the bigger issue. And we'll figure it out. And praise to God, the Ukrainians will figure it out if we don't. But we need to be prepared for what we don't see coming, and we have to stay united, and we have to have coherence in response, because the one thing the Russians are very good at finding are those seams between us and exploiting them. They tried their best with Hungary, but they still haven't succeeded. And let us hope that they never do. Anywhere else, for that matter.
In terms of resilience, it's just incredible how resilient the Ukrainian people are. Because we work a lot with resilience from different dimensions of it, whether it's the continuity of government or critical infrastructure or disinformation or societal resilience. And there's so much for us to look there and to be inspired, to learn from it. It's just impressive.
Can I comment on that?
Absolutely.
I spent 12 years in and out of Kyiv working in the Ministry of Defense and General Staff, trying to help reform them with only limited success. And it's probably our fault more than Ukrainians. I acknowledge that. But there are two things. One, I agree with you 100%. The resilience of the government surprises me, and I'm heartened and I'm happy to see that. But I think what's even more impressive, and this is something I think bears value for your center to research very deeply, is look how Ukrainian civil society has come together, self-organized since 2014, 2015. Look at what the volunteers have been doing for years. I mean, back 15, 16, 40% of logistics was being provided to the frontline troops in the Donbass and Luhansk and Donbass by civil society, self-organized. Businessmen out of their going to people throughout the countryside, getting food, getting money, getting medicines, because the army had no facility to be able to deliver logistics, let alone plan it. So civil society there is proven itself to be incredibly resilient, very responsive, and inherently not Russian. Very Western, and no Ukrainian is waiting to be given orders. And just look how they've been able to take a Western weapon system and make it better. To use it for something nobody's ever thought of before, and to make it effective in that. Simply by using their own initiative, their own intelligence, and just getting it done. I mean, that is, the studies that need to go into that to inform us and old democracies, who think we have these resilient, civil societies. I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn from them. And then how they have been able to coordinate their efforts with existing government structures and processes and procedures, which is very difficult. It's a very unresponsive governmental system they have. But they made it work. And God bless them for that, and shame on us if we don't learn from them.
From my perspective, it's quite dangerous to discuss about resilience in this environment of discussing about what's happening in Ukraine. Because in Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, part of the Russian Empire. So from my perspective, it's something different. Because what means resilience for them, for Slavian community, for Ukrainians doesn't mean resilience. They want something new. They want to be a country with Ukrainian people that are very proud, and they affirm everywhere that they are not Russians.
Yes.
Yes. But the Russians, on the other hand, they affirm that Ukrainians are Russians and Moldavians are Russians. It is very important to understand what's happening in the mind of the Russians. To understand the other parts is an easy way to find the right answer and the right solution for the end of the war, for the new relations. From my perspective, I appreciate the perspective of Professor Iancu, but if from the United States perspective, here is something that is they're looking with interest. For us, it is vital. There is a difference. For United States, Russian show their weakness. For us, we are still seeing a Russian that occupied a part of Ukraine. A part of Ukraine is occupied and of 4 regions, and Crimea declared that they are part of Russia. So for Ukraine, it's not the same thing like we can see this as a game with players that they lost something, they gained something. No, for them, for Ukrainians, is vital. For Romania, is vital. The presence of Americans and French and US soldiers here is very important because we need this perspective to see that Russians are not so strong and we have to not afraid about them. But it is important to appreciate right the place that we have because we are part of the region.
Yes.
So if the United States will have another very important interest, we will be still here with the Russians in Black Sea with their fleet with their soldiers. They will be still in Ukraine. I don't know when the war will end and how will be the end of the war.
Thank you. Do you have something to
I could not agree more, and I thank you for that distinction because that's very important. And I think you touch upon a very important point, and this was a point that I spoke at length with colleagues last spring when I was in University of Łódź in Poland. Was one, how does the war end? And two, what can we do now to create, if we can, a more stable and constructive modus vivendi with whatever emerges in Russia. General Ben Hodges has been insistent that he thinks Russia is going to break up, and I think this is a distinct possibility. I'm not a deep Russian scholar, but I'm an avid student of Russian history. I think history speaks against it, but you look at the conditions there now. It's a frightening thought to think there might be, many different statelets, because now, unlike in 1990, 91, now you have many private armies. The regions have their own armies. You have, the possibility of conflict is huge, and against the backdrop of nuclear forces. And who runs them? And what's the command and control and the protection? I mean, it's a horrific thought, but we need to think about it. And is there any way we can do anything now? Because you're going to have to live with Russia in the region. They're not going away, even if they do break up. Is there anything we can start thinking about now? I'm not qualified to do that, so I'm happy to have somebody else do that, like your center. But we need to start thinking about what happens thereafter.
If I may, I would say that we refer to two fundamental concepts, security and resilience here, and they are still ambiguous concepts because they can collide to each other if we place resilience in a national or within a collective defense approach. So resilience, by definition, refers to the ability of facing a significant threat, a significant shock, including a military one, and it means to accumulate resources, to accumulate power, to firstly resist, and after that to be able to respond to that significant threat. And the available resources are limited. And when it comes to the distribution of resources within NATO, for instance, we need sound decisions focusing on the existing security hot topics, just to be sure that we will be able to effectively respond to this significant threat Russian Federation poses against eastern flank, mostly against the Black Sea region and the Baltic region. So I think that we still have to define this concept of resilience and to go in much more depth to understand how this concept can be practically implemented in the defense field. as it also requires a lot of contribution from the civilian part. You said that civil society in Ukraine, for instance, greatly responded to this security threat, to this Russian invasion in Ukraine. And this could be a good example, as this concept of resilience works also into the civilian field, not only into the military part.
This is one of the reasons why here at the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center we try to look at the resilience from a whole of government and whole of society perspective, because they are complementary, they complement each other. And also when we look at the resilience these days, we also want to bring at the table the private sector,
Yes.
which becomes more and more essential to the whole process of resilience, defense, security.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How will we accept NATO and EU if we will describe NATO and EU as very resilient organization? How do you believe that it's possible to accept Ukraine as part of NATO, as part of the EU, if NATO and EU will be very resilient?
I wish I had an answer for that. I hope it is. My fear is that if you're a good student of NATO history, and I'm not lecturing anybody, but I'll be very blunt. If you're a good student of NATO history, NATO nations have been very, very reluctant to take into the alliance any country that has problems with their borders.
We know very well.
Yes, so do the Hungarians. How do we take in Ukraine now with their relationship, whatever it is post-conflict, what Ukraine looks like, what Russia looks like? I think it's probably too early. I know that a dear friend of mine, Dr. Steve Blank, has argued very strongly of the need for the inclusion of NATO into Ukraine into NATO. I mean, politically, I don't think it's possible. There are certain countries in the alliance, I'm not going to go into details, but we all know who they are, would be the first ones to put the red flag on that, because we're not buying our way into a conflict with Russia. Well, to Steve Blank's, in favor of his thesis, is that, you can't, I don't mean to be vulgar, but you can't be a little bit pregnant. And, we're pregnant. We may not be actively, killing Russians, but we're giving the Ukrainians the tools to do it. And, we continue to give them even more greater numbers and greater capabilities at lethality. Because apparently we can, and there hasn't been any negative response from the Russians. What are they going to do? Use a nuke? I mean, come on, this is preposterous. So I think it speaks to that thesis of my friend Dr. Steve Blank that, we're already there. Now, what does that do? Well, that immediately brings us into a conflict with Russia. Well, if Ukraine had already been a member of NATO, this wouldn't have happened. Okay, but bringing them into NATO, and let's say back in the Bucharest, 2008, I guess it was, the Bucharest summit, may have precipitated a war. I mean, immediately thereafter, you saw the Georgian war, but that I don't know if that's really a false positive, to be frank, because those were local things that the Georgians were actually doing. So it bears the debate, sir. And it bears a continuous dialogue and discussion about this, because, can we feel Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, can we feel secure with a Ukraine at war? It's bad for everybody. It's bad for business. It's bad for our dear Ukrainian friends, perhaps future allies, is my own personal opinion. We have to think harder about this, because it's always best to be in front of the problems and not behind. And as you know, we've seen in this case, we were behind because democracies are always slow to react. That's just the way we are. It's historically the case and will always be. But now we are party in part to a conflict, dare we say. In which case, we better start thinking hard about, one, how do we make sure it comes to a fruitful conclusion for our interests, and how do we do that in such a way that, we have some sort of relationship, constructive relationship with Moscow afterwards. Maybe it'll be Petersburg. Which Russia are you going to get out of this conflict? Are you going to get many Russias? Or are you going to get the Petersburg Russia? Or are you going to get the Moscow Russia? The Slavic Russia? Or are you going to have the European-focused Russia? Heaven only knows. But I think we have to be prepared.
In my opinion, this is the only way to make Ukrainians safe. So, and the most important thing is that this is their will to join the democratic world, and we have to defend that. It is our responsibility as liberal democracies to work together, to provide them all necessary resources to face such a huge threat coming from the Moscow administration, and to make them safe in the years to come, letting the doors open to join NATO and the European Union according with their will.
Can I just follow up on that point and support you? There is a narrative amongst certain individuals in the West that the West precipitated this conflict by NATO expansion. And there's something inherently wrong and threatening to Russia by NATO expansion. And I would just like to say to those people who feel that way, please go and reread, if you haven't done it, reread Russian history. Catherine the Great, I need to stabilize my borders by forever expanding them. And I can't remember the name of the minister in the late 19th century in Moscow. No cannon in Europe can fire without our permission. That's Russian policy. It's been consistent since Peter the Great. If you don't like that, I can't help you. But that's, you can almost predict Russian behavior based upon those sorts of statements. And frankly, if the Baltics and if Poland and if Romania were not in the alliance, the example of Ukraine is looking at you right there. So let's delegitimate that line of argumentation.
But it's not the same. Because when Baltics, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, it was another era, another time. Now, I believe that Russia can be defeated. But not so. Okay.
I think so.
But they will not, Russia will not renounce to the empire.
They can't.
They cannot. The public opinion in Russia is for the great Russia.
Yeah.
So Ukraine, in this view, Ukraine is not a country. In Russian view, is a part of Russia. So the best scenario or the optimistic scenario could be a frozen conflict. And a frozen conflict between Ukraine that can defeat Russia. They can win and they can have Crimea, as John Hodges said last year in August. Okay, but what's happened after that? What's happened with the relation between Russia and Ukraine? Will be a frozen conflict. So how will solve this problem with NATO if we'll be resilient and will keep the rules to accept Ukraine part of NATO? It is a question that I cannot answer.
We can only frame the question at this point, but I agree with you. It's a hard one. And I hope, I don't know what comes out of this conflict, but I just pray that it's not an even bigger frozen conflict. Because Russians have done very, very well exploiting those instances of frozen conflicts. It never works out well for the countries involved and for Western interests. But that may be the best outcome against all the others that we've looked at.
talking about frozen conflict. Professor, I've read that you work in Moldova and you know the situation there pretty well. A few days ago, Iancu said that a serious debate about Moldova's neutrality is taking place in Chișinău at this particular moment, thus evoking a potential candidacy of Moldova to NATO. A senior Russian official responded that Moldova could have the same fate as Ukraine if it continues to have this conversation. You worked for many years in Moldova. Can Moldova afford such a choice? And what does this mean for Romania?
Well, I mean, you could make the argument that if I remember correctly, in the Moldovan Republic of Moldova's constitution, you have the provision of state neutrality. That was put there for mischievous reasons by certain people who were doing Moscow's bidding, because again, this allows Russia to make mischief, and they've made considerable mischief in Moldova. The Transnistria has not been helpful to any Western interest in the region. Moldova is a unique case. One of the arguments I've heard in past from my many Moldovan friends is we're not really interested in joining the West because those who wanted to join the West are already living in Romania and have Romanian passports. So, these were people that may have had their own individual best interest in mind, as opposed to being part of the Republic of Romania, or being a member of the alliance. I would just say that I would hope that they would get rid of that provision. That's their own national political decision to make. But my own personal view is that I would like to see them without that burden to be able to make the decisions they want to make. I know very few Moldovans who feel a strong affinity for Russia in a sincere way, and I think they would like very much nothing better than to be more wealthy and have the same opportunities as their cousins in Romania have. So I would like to think that they will take that path. I mean, the sad part in Romania is, again, Russian mischief with their oligarchs, throwing political elections in favor of parties and governments that are pro-Russian, and then they throw those rascals out, and then you bring in reformists who never really seem to be able to make the necessary reforms, to curtail corruption, to improve the investment environment, which is what the country desperately needs. It's a beautiful country, wonderful people. I like it very much. I just wish I would wish them a much better future than what the last 30 years, or dare I say, since 1940, their fate has been compliments of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
Yeah.
President Sandu is a very brave person, a very brave woman. This issue is quite difficult to debate right now, and it was very difficult to debate in Moldova, Republic of Moldova, because of the presence of Russian tactical operative group.
Yeah.
They are present there. They still have a military presence in Moldova, in the Republic of Moldova. We cannot we have to see this, and it is important to understand the position of the Republic of Moldova, that they want to be neutral, but it's difficult to be neutral with Russian presence in their country.
But should Romania support a NATO membership for Moldova?
Romania has to respect the decision of the Republic of Moldova. So it is very important as an official, Romania has to respect the decision of the people of the Republic of Moldova, not another kind of. We can have a personal position, but we cannot say an official position for Romania to to support the Republic of Moldova in NATO or EU if they don't want this.
Absolutely.
If they will want, if they will declare, if they will accept in the parliament to be a democratic country, part of EU, of course, Romania will support that. If they will decide to be member of NATO, of course, Romania will support that. But without a decision from the Parliament of the Republic of Naval, we cannot do anything.
Well, so far they have expressed their intention to join the European Union, and Romania stands fully behind them. Because again, as you said, it was a popular decision assumed by the Parliament.
No hope for the best, prepared for the worst. At least for us in the security field. So, in my opinion, that provision regarding neutrality was issued in Moldova's constitution as a matter of survival. Otherwise, they were exposed to this threat coming from Russia to impose their policies and leaders in Chisinau. But now we have to look to the available resources for such huge developments. Moldova GDP in 2022 was somewhere around $14 billion. Just to compare with Romania's GDP, that was $300 billion, we can understand that Romania's GDP is 20 times larger than Moldova's GDP. Such a dynamic to take and follow the path towards the European Union and NATO costs a lot. And Moldova must be supported not only by Romania to pursue this path, but also by all EU member states and also NATO member states, if Moldova decides to have this significant shift from neutrality to NATO membership.
Thank you.
Can I just pose a nettlesome point on this? Is that I don't think it's written down anywhere, but I think it's pretty much at a minimum norm in Brussels that the EU is not really interested in having members in the EU who are not already members of NATO. Okay, Finland and Sweden were special cases because they're special.
Yeah.
You know, Moldova is not special. I mean, look at the Balkans. It's very clear. You know, you have NATO membership, which basically validates, you know, the transatlantic alliance saying, we've got this. Their borders are settled. We're going to bring them into the integrated military structure. We're going to have them part of NIADS, you know, the air defense. So they're not going to be a defense liability on the EU. The exceptions are made, but I think Moldova being in the position that they're in, you know, with a tiny GDP, with declining demography, they would be in a very hard position, I think, to try to get EU membership right now. Without that, again, I don't think this is a written policy in stone, but I think as part of these political movements are very carefully choreographed in the Western world. I think the expectation would be there. Because again, the EU still have an obligation to support each other. It may not be necessarily with an integrated command structure that's functional, but you know, there still is that mutual commitment. And I think Brussels would very much want to see the Americans part of this mutual defense pact.
Approaching the final questions. Speaking of maritime security and resilience as a central element of security and defense, what should Romania and NATO do more and better in the Black Sea region as an area of strategic relevance in the future? would a strengthened fleet in the Black Sea be an option? What can we learn from what happened, that we weren't enough prepared, and that now we realized the strategic importance of the Black Sea? What can be the better?
Well, I think the mere fact that the new strategic concept acknowledges that Russia's a threat. I think it's article or paragraph or article number 8, and then 40. I think it's 45
Yeah.
that mentions the Black Sea and the importance of the Black Sea. Finally, that's a good start. Let's see what follows on. I would just say that I think we, the Americans, have been really quite active in the Black Sea since 2015, 2016. I think if you look at all the programs we have to help countries have a better radar picture of their territorial waters, the work we've been doing with, a lot of work we've been doing with the Romanian Navy to help them build up those capabilities. The mere fact that we have, and it's not classified, but it happens all the time, at least weekly, but I don't know for sure. I mean, we have P-8 Poseidons out of Sigonella and have actively been doing patrols over the Black Sea for a number of years, operating out of Burgos in Bulgaria. So I think we've done a lot, and maybe, can't prove a negative maybe, but the mere fact that we've been doing this, not by ourselves, but with our allies in the region, has helped dissuade the Russian fleet from doing more than what they had done. I would love, and this is my own personal opinion, because it's your money, so I can't spend your money, but I would love to see a fleet of 3 SSKs, diesel electric submarines in the Romanian Navy. Why? Because I know for a fact that those Russian submarines, those kilos, would be very, very reluctant to leave port. That's a very expensive capability. You need to start training the captain of that first boat, 10 years ago, if you can even find boats that you could buy today. But that sort of capability that causes such a disproportionate amount of response on the part of the Russians. Those are the sorts of things that we need to do. The radars are great, so we have a much better picture. MARCOM has a much better picture of the Black Sea. Building those capabilities, you're getting the naval ship, missiles. Okay, this sort of thing that's disproportionate. I think we should do more of that. I have argued in an article I published in the Naval War College Review, looking at NATO's new navy, so to speak, looking at we need to do a lot of experimentation in this part of the world and in the Baltic as well. Why? Because it's cheap. And how do we come up with capabilities that produce disproportionate responses on the part of Russia? Because they may have dollars, but they have a hell of a time getting microchips. And I want to make it even harder. And we can look at cyber, we can look at drones, we can look at unmanned vehicles. There are all sorts of new capabilities, systems and platforms that we should be thinking about, as opposed to, and again, this is a critique of my own Navy, because in 2016, my own Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, sent a public letter to the Secretary of the Navy saying, you are focusing too much of your time, money, and effort on platforms, and you're forgetting about the importance of weapons. And he's right. We have to put all of our focus on weapons, and how do we make the Russians respond disproportionately? That's what's going to give us the deterrence we want. We don't want to go to war with Russia, but by God, we want to be able to deter them.
For our study, we discussed about security, maritime security strategy. It's very important to have the right weapons, the right platforms for weapons in Black Sea. What kind of fleet, what kind of vessels we need, it is another thing. But for the beginning, it is important to have, as we are, that we are geographically, we are, Romania is a maritime country. It is very important to develop maritime goals and maritime interest to be effective maritime country. After that, we will have something to defend. If we don't have something to defend, it is difficult to build a fleet. What kind of fleet for what? It is important to have the right assets for surveillance in Black Sea to be sure that we can do by ourselves what NATO is doing right now.
Yeah.
It is important to have the main assets to respond if something is happening in Black Sea. It is important to defend our shore against the mines.
Mm.
But could be another kind of threats, and we have to understand if we will have the right goals, the right interest as a maritime country, what kind of fleet we have to develop.
I'm not a maritime security expert, but what I know is that we have to defend the EU borders, including the maritime borders, and Romania must be able to provide such kind of protection. And also I think that we have to be able to provide an effective infrastructure to NATO forces to project our operations, including in the Black Sea, on the maritime realm.
Just a quick question, the last one. I want to talk a little bit about the strategic importance of the Snake Island.
Mm.
We have heard a lot of talks in the past months. How important is it for Romania, and as well as for NATO, that the Ukrainian flag flies on the island and not the Russian? And why is it so strategic, so important?
I would answer the first, just to let Professor Iancu conclude this meeting today. In my opinion, this island is more a symbol than a strategic asset, let's say, for some actor here in the region. So it increasingly became a symbolistic piece that must be defended in order to prove the ability of a part or another to succeed in a greater, let's say, conflict, to reach a greater goal.
It is very important if the flag is on the island is friendly or not. This is the right answer.
That's a very good answer.
Yeah.
Professor?
I think, well, obviously, from a Romanian perspective, yeah, the closer the Russian flag, the bad, the worse it is. I agree. I think a little bit different perspective, and it's reflective of my past working in this part of the world. Part of my work for the Department of Defense is, any Ukrainian effort that can impede or destroy the Russians to operate a radar is a good thing.
Yeah.
Anything to destroy their radar picture, by definition, is a good thing. So I think it is symbolic, but I think it's also practical to destroying that radar station there. But this speaks to something that this is where, again, when you don't have a lot of money, you have to think. And I would highly encourage my Romanian friends to think this way, that you are a maritime nation, you have been for many years, but you have this kind of archipelagic environment, coastline, and I wouldn't copy, but I would talk really intently with the Finns and the Swedes, who have completely different region, but similar topography, different oceanography, I got that. But not what it is that they're going to do, but what was their thinking, being able to make their coastline as resilient as possible should the Russians ever attack them. And they created very modest forces. They're very much, they're not deployable. They were never meant to be. But those Eusebiu corvettes, which have a lot of stealth technology in them that they can hide. Those submarines which they have designed, very expensive submarines, but very good submarines, which they use for national purposes. Not to replicate them, but to understand their thinking. Because, you're going to have to make a decision. Do we want a blue water fleet? Well, can we afford a blue water fleet? I think the numbers won't help that. Expeditionary naval operations are probably outside of your budget. That's a national decision.
Yeah.
But if it's out of your budget, how do you make that coastline as resilient as possible? MCM, mine countermeasures, mines. I'm a big proponent of sea mines. Again, because they force a disproportionate response. You don't need the world's best submarines, but you need something better than those kilos, which shouldn't be too hard. And then, the operational concepts that go behind it. And that's where I think talking to the Finns and the Swedes, and talk to the old guys. What were they thinking in the 60s and the 70s? And how that changed with technology. And now that they're entering the alliance, how is this going to affect their operational concept? The technology, they're already world-class technology in terms of their navies, okay? But they're not blue water navies, but they've got world-class technology. How is this going to affect their operational concepts? I predict this is going to be the biggest challenge both countries will have coming into a formal collective defense agreement with NATO, is the way they have to change their thinking and their operational concept. And that's hard. It's much easier to buy a new piece of equipment, but to change the way you do business, to change those concepts, that's going to take a lot of hard thinking on their part. And it's going to be difficult, particularly people in my age group. The younger people may kludge on faster. But they may surprise us. The Finns and Swedes are remarkable people. They're very bright. And they'll figure it out faster than anybody else, I predict.
I have to be more precise. Some years ago, a flag of Ukraine, once upon a time, a flag on the Snake Island was a flag of Ukraine, but not so friendly. I hope to be a friendly flag. But if about the presence in Black Sea, I felt more safety, more secure when Exxon was in Black Sea. Now I'm not so my feeling is not so strong, even that we have 20 days an American destroyer.
I understand.
That is, when private equity is there, you can feel safe. Because they've made the determination.
It comes with certain guarantees?
No, it's just that they've done the risk assessment. And it's like, okay, we feel comfortable investing billions of dollars in this capability. I think the general's right. How do we get that should be our definition of success in the Black Sea.
So I hope after the bill was approved in American Congress, something will be changed. Not only the military presence here in the Black Sea region, but to be sure that the interest of the United States will be effective, and for long term, it is important to have a strong presence, an economical strong presence here.
Amen. Amen.
On that note, I want to thank you for sharing with us your experience, your ideas. I want also to thank those watching us today.